Well, it looks like the water fight is about to start again in earnest. Water issues and water management in the Murray-Darling Basin is something I've been covering for over 10 years now. My first video on the topic was released in 2012. The fight really kicked off in 2007 with the complete rewriting of water management in the Murray-Darling Basin, thanks to the then federal government, the then Liberal federal government, and it was supported by Labor and the Greens. It's a thing called the Water Act of 2007, and in my opinion remains one of the most destructive pieces of legislation that we've ever seen pass through the federal government in this country. Well, a lot has happened in the last 10 or so years, and many of the goals and objectives of this piece of legislation have been missed by a mile, or in fact, the opposite of what they claimed they were intending has actually taken place. Things are about to get even worse. Basin communities are suffering, the actual landscape and environment are suffering, our food prices are suffering, and someone who's here to tell us all about this latest, unfortunately, piece of bad news is Lloyd Polkinghorne. We've seen him before. Lloyd returns to the Aussie Y now. Lloyd, thank you so much for coming on.
G'day, Topher. Hope you're going well.
I'm doing very well, but I wish I could bring you on under slightly better circumstances. This announcement that we've just seen come out of Canberra is a bit of a kick in the guts for basin communities. Bring us up to date with what's happened.
So Federal Water Minister Tanya Plibersek is coming after the 450 gigalitres. Now, the basin plan set about returning 2,750 gigs for the environment. They actually hold in water accounts now 4,600 gigs, or a bit more, and they're chasing more on top of what they've already got, and they can't deliver what they've got, and there is so many mistruths that are being bandied around in relation to the basin plan.
Well, one of the issues with this whole topic, and something that I ran into headlong, I'm a city boy born and bred. I wasn't aware of irrigation and how it worked and how river systems worked at all when I began researching the topic in 2011. It really is a very, very layered, very, very detailed, very, very nuanced topic. But if we can just try to actually take a step back, for those that are hearing about this for the very first time, this is a completely new subject for them. How do we bring them into this? What was the Water Act of 2007? What was it supposedly claiming to be trying to do, and what's actually happened in reality since?
Yeah, so the Water Act 2007 was a plan to restore the balance within the basin. So they're aiming for a triple bottom line of a healthy environment, good communities, and also food production. The things that provide, all the basics for a society, which is healthy environment, food for people to eat, and jobs, and rural economies. Unfortunately, the basin plan really has been bastardised. We've seen 83% of the water recovered actually come out of the southern connected system, so southern New South Wales and northern Victoria. And that's a huge impact, not only to regional communities, farmers, food production, but also the environment that exists outside of the icon sites the government's trying to save. And so they were buying back huge parcels of water. But it's like any market. You actually, when you short a limited resource, there's a lot more competition. They allowed water trading, so to get the basin plan, they actually had to detach water allocations from land. And so we've now seen institutional investors, both foreign and domestic, come in to trade what is a limited, finite resource that we need to, feed animals and grow food. So a lot more competition for the precious resource.
The best way I can communicate what's happened here to city people like what I was, I've now of course moved out of Melbourne, but even that's only very recent. But 10 years ago, when I was trying to wrap my head around this, was imagine the federal government coming in, giving themselves effectively an unlimited budget to buy up 1/3 of all the petrol in your city. What would happen to the remaining 2/3 petrol prices? Well, it wouldn't go up just by a little bit. It would go up massively because everyone would be fighting over those limited resources. And that's essentially what the federal government has done with water. Water is as essential to food and fibre producing communities as what petrol is to a city needing to transport and move goods around and so forth. And we saw prices going to absolutely astronomical levels during the height of the drought and the height of the negative impact. Now, Lloyd, I believe I'm correct in saying that the height of the madness has subsided somewhat. We've seen a couple of years with decent rain. In fact, our dams are now full, much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of Tim Flannery, who predicted that even the rains we have wouldn't be enough to fill them anymore. You mentioned there 4,000 gigalitres of water that is sitting there already held by, is that held by the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder? What are we talking about here? Is there a way that the common person can grasp just the vast quantity of water that we're talking about, and what is that being held for?
Yeah, so it's 4,600 gigs or over 4,000 gigs, and that is held in different environmental accounts, both state and federally. So to give you some context, a gigalitre is 1,000 megalitres. Farmers around here where I grew up, they'd have an average
Sorry,
sort
for
of water.
those who don't know, though, we need to really, because I remember what it was like for me. A megaliter is a million liters. So think
Mm,
about your water bill. How many? We're all supposed to be living on what is it? 155 liters of water a day, whatever. Imagine a million liters. That's more than I can already wrap my head around. And now imagine 1,000 of those, and that's just 1 gigaliter. And the government is holding 4,000 plus such gigaliters. And they're sitting in dams right now. They're taking up space in our dams and displacing what could have been, because some of our dams have spilled recently. That's displacing, if I understand correctly, what could have been water being held for farmers for irrigation purposes.
yeah, and that's one of the hard things to actually convey is actually what water's flowing down the river. Because most people have this perception that environmental water is the water to keep the river flowing.
Mm,
And that may be true for like the Darling Barker, but for the Goulburn, the Murray, the Edwards, we actually have water allocations that are set aside first to ensure the flow of the river.
mm,
So I've got critical human needs set aside. We have conveyance water, also dilution flows so
mm,
that salt levels don't get too high. And so these are all these parcels of water that actually are in the river already and performing environmental function. We also have floods. So floods are turned unregulated flows. So if you hold the dam really full, you're
mm,
going to get more floods. You're going to get more unregulated flows.
mm,
And so these are like an additional bonus that they never talk about. So when they talk about we need more environmental water to save the river, you go, well, hang on. You've got 4 or 5 other classes of water that are
mm,
doing the same function.
mm,
So environmental water they may throw on top to cause a flood on a high river so they can get higher on the floodplain and perform some ecosystem functions. And they also have their darling down the bottom, which is the South Australian lower lakes, which is, Australia's only freshwater estuary apparently. So we are trying to fight the Southern Ocean. If
mm.
we have a high climate, why on earth are we trying to fight the Southern Ocean with all our freshwater resource?
It's quite an extraordinary thing. I did a series of videos on exactly that topic, and Lloyd, that's how you and I got to know each other years ago. Was through my coverage as this sort of wide-eyed city boy trying to wrap my head around these what are perceived to be country issues, but I now recognise, of course, are issues that affect us all. From the perspective of those who are just now trying to wrap their head around this, what's the impact of this 450 gigalitre announcement, the buybacks? And in particular, what I think people need to understand is the difference between the impact of a buyback versus, let's say, a water efficiency measure that just causes less water to be used for a given outcome. Why are buybacks attracting such opposition from communities specifically?
Righto. So buybacks are really devastating because they actually remove productive water in a Swiss cheese effect across irrigation districts. And so a farmer here, there, or anywhere can choose to sell water to the government. That creates problems with water delivery because both water companies on both sides of the river here now are running at a loss because they've lost so much water out of their footprint. So fees for the remaining farmers go up.
Mm-hmm.
We automatically lose production, whether it be industry like dairy or rice or, you know, horticulture. And so you're losing critical mass and processors are struggling to find enough product to actually, look to the future and process.
Mm,
And then you lose, the flow on effect. So footy clubs, schools, hospitals, doctors, all these things are tied to um, the prosperity of these communities, and water has a direct impact on that. We have countless social and economic reports which spell out the impacts of removing water from these districts.
mm,
And if you are going to try and buy water, you actually need to identify whereabouts in the basin you need it and where you're going to store it because
mm,
it's a huge basin and the water doesn't sit on one river and one storage and solve the problem somewhere else. If you're trying to solve issues on the Darling Barker, why are you buying water in the Southern Connected System that doesn't even connect there?
yeah.
So we have all these issues that they don't talk about. They have these glossy headlines in national papers
Mm,
and fluffy things about saving the environment. But I can tell you that the ecosystem loss in our districts is massive.
mm,
Victoria have done a project where they were modernising the channels to save the environment. So they're removing earthen channels and replacing them with plastic lined and piping. So across northern Victoria, they've done just shy of 2,000 kilometres.
Mm,
Now, you think, well, they're saving water, that's great, but earthen channels, if they leak a bit, they actually grow bushes and trees and have all these ecosystems. They're actually some
mm,
of the best wildlife corridors you can find because they tie in all these other, forests and farmland, and animals can mingle along them,
mm,
feed, breed, do all these things. Now, Victoria's just wiped out 2,000 k's of them. So nothing, if it's dry, nothing can get a drink.
mm,
If it's plastic lined, things that go for a drink actually slip in and drown. So
mm,
I have water attendants who tell me about finding dead koalas and dead kangaroos and you name it. And the other thing is, if you've got a plastic lined channel, you can't clean it with an excavator. So you've got to use harsher chemicals, things like acrolein. So every fish that's in the water gets rolled with acrolein. So
mm,
some of our best fish stocks are actually found in irrigation channels. There's a Polack swamp just north of Barham here, which was a regeneration project. It's a really critical historic Indigenous site. There was basically a village that supported 500 traditional owners, and they had all these wonderful wetlands, and they had huge, huge importance to the region. So
mm.
to restore that, they actually found endangered fish in the local channels, in the irrigation
Yeah,
channels, all
wow.
these fish. And now you look at Victoria, and they're like, no, we don't need channels. We'll just
Yeah.
wipe them all out. And you just think, if you're trying to save the environment, what actually are you trying to achieve?
Mm,
And how are
mm.
you going about that?
Well, this is one of the questions that I asked back in my 2012 video on the topic, saying, well, where does the environment start and stop? And why in this plan are we not factoring in the environmental positives that are being delivered by farmers and by the delivery of irrigation water to farmers, exactly as you described
Yeah.
there? Now, Tanya Plibersek, the Environment Minister, has been crowing about this as an achievement since the other day when it was announced. And this is her Twitter feed here, and I'll be scrolling down, and you can just see post after post all about this topic of we are going to deliver the basin plan in full, as though that's a good thing, and we are going to deliver this 450 gigalitres even if it requires buybacks. But there's two things that really caught my eye. Firstly, in one of those tweets, she directs her readers to go and have a look at an article in The Conversation. Now, it's this article that I've got here from The Conversation. And I read the article myself. I mean, hey, if my Environment Minister, my Federal Environment Minister tells me to do something, well, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I read the article, and it's full of misdirection and all kinds of things I could have pointed out. But you know what really caught my eye was this little gem right here. Within the article that Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek has directed people to, it says, the federal government needs to find more effective carrots and sticks to engender state compliance. In other words, this journalist is directly calling for the Environment Minister and the government as a whole to be given more power, including sticks, that's the ability to punish, as well as carrots, well, that's typically the ability to spend taxpayers' money to try and fix this problem. Now, that's the first thing that caught my eye, and I just covered this in detail in the editorial at the start of this episode. But what I want to get to with you, Lloyd, is the second part of this, and that is that Victoria is not participating. Now, we've just come off a situation where New South Wales were not going to participate either, but that's just changed with the change of government in New South Wales. What's the significance of Victoria not participating, and why would they make that choice and thus far be sticking to their guns on that? What's in it for them or for the Victorian people?
Yeah, there's generally not much praise I can give about the Andrews government, but their ability to actually stand strong against the Federal's push is great. Like,
Mm,
that's fantastic. They're actually standing up for their rural communities. Victoria's been decimated. Their
mm,
irrigation industry, 51% of the new $2 billion upgrade now doesn't deliver water because so
ah,
much water's gone out of their areas.
yeah.
Kahuna, they've lost, 70,000 dairy cows in the last few years.
Mm,
There's over 66 or 70 farms gone out of the Ganawara region, dairy farms.
mm,
So they are seeing real impacts. And, part of me thinks, oh, great, that's great. They're standing up and they're standing strong. They've also seen huge damage on the Goulburn River because that's just getting eroded like a rapid rate and
mm,
knots. Same thing happening on the Murray. So Victoria stopped water transfers out of the Goulburn for that
mm,
region.
mm,
Um, but the other thing is, I don't know whether they're also trying to get more funding. That'll be one thing to watch. So I
okay.
hope they stay strong. I hope Harriet Singh continues with the excellent leadership she's showing. We are extremely disappointed. New South Wales keeps saying, yes, we don't support buybacks, but why would you sign up to something where buybacks sees a huge part of it? You have to factor in that the 450 is only one bucket of water they want. There's the 605 gigalitres, which was meant to be obtained through SDL projects, so efficiency.
Sustainable diversion limits projects,
yeah. So I think there's about 300 gigs of that they say is not going to net water or return water. So that's the other thing. So we may be looking at 450 plus the balance of the SDLs, so maybe another 300 gigs on top of that. So New South Wales actually needs to fight. And I think one of the problems, Topher, and I've heard David Landini, you've interviewed him before, politics is so city-centric because we don't actually have any electorates out here. There's New South Wales, there's 7 seats west of the divide, so only a couple of seats of those are impacted by water issues. And so we actually need the politicians to have a good hard look and say, well, if we want clean, green Australian produce, we need to support these people and keep a critical mass within their industries. Importing food's one thing, but I'd rather know where my food comes from, that there's rules and regulations about it, and they do it in a sustainable manner.
It's also a matter of cost, to be able to say, well, right now we have a cost of living crisis. The cost of energy is absurdly high, in my opinion, due largely to government regulation. The cost of living is absurdly high, in my opinion, due largely to government spending and government taxation. The value of our dollar has gone down, in my opinion, largely due to government money printing. And now the cost of our food is going up even more than it already would have due to energy and other things because our farmers are having to pay such an absurd amount for their irrigation water and as well as complying with all kinds of other onerous requirements as well. So we've got a situation here from if I'm understanding what Tanya Plibersek has announced and what you've described to me today, we're looking at a situation where basically the southern New South Wales irrigation districts are on the hook for all of this 450 gigalitres and possibly more, assuming that Victoria stands their ground and doesn't allow the federal government to do more buybacks inside Victoria.
Yeah, well, to buy water back, you need water licences and need water to be measured, which we have and always have been here, and they need somewhere to store it. So I think the places they'll be looking will be our regions again, which is just devastating. I cannot believe you can come this far down a process and they not understand.
Look, it's devastating, and what I'll do is I'll put the links to my previous videos on this topic. I've got a 10-year body of work on this topic. I'll include those videos in the links in the description of this video. And look, let's hope that we can win this fight. This is a bit of a blow. I've got to say, I'm personally very disappointed. I'm sure that you are, and I know that there's going to be an awful lot of good, decent, hard-working primary producers all over southern New South Wales scratching their heads right now, wondering how this could have even been done, how they could have been betrayed and stabbed in the back like this, and then in the next breath wondering how they're going to keep going under these circumstances. So, Lloyd, let's. I'm not going to say it's time for the pitchforks, but it's certainly time to get back into the fight, and let's hope that we can win this one.
Yeah, no, thanks for your time, Topher, and thanks for your highlighting the issues that you have done over the years. Yeah. It is such a complicated discussion, and we just need general conversations about it.
Lloyd Polkinghorne, thank you so much.
Thanks, Topher. Cheers.